Okay. As you've done these with Channel 23 and elsewhere, if you say something, you just want to have it come away, take it off, just say it, because we're recording it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things, David, we found out that makes for better footage is when people tell stories, In documentary, you can just go through this book and throw out facts, but the stories are part of the
I understand.
Yeah. So if you think of something and you want to use it, then by all means go ahead and do that. In the research I did before we got started, there's 3 major events that shaped who Cobb County is today, I think. And I don't know if you agree, but one was the Bell Bomber plant came in here. They announced it in 42, I think, or 43.
Yeah.
And then second was Ernest Barrett and the decision that he brought about to build water sewer system around the county that allowed our county to grow like it did. And then the third one is what Bill Kenny said, that the Braves and the Battery Atlanta longer term will be our third big thing. And you can already tell it is. So in that journey, there were a lot of things that happened intentionally by people like yourself. And what we're trying to do is capture the godfathers, the people that actually made this happen. So I'm interviewing John Sherholtz and Mike Plant. I've already interviewed him. All right, we got it here. Why did people pick Cobb County to put this park? And I want John Sherholtz to be real specific about that. And you know it's because of who we are. It wasn't incentives, it was who we are, the infrastructure you built. So then the question becomes, how did we get that good? What were the decisions that were made or actions taken that allowed us to continue to grow in our efficiency as a county? And you were part of most of that. We're just trying to tell that story, and we're pulling out people that were involved to some degree, federally and locally. So that's really what we're doing. That's all we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll ask you questions, and there'll be questions.
There was one other, I think, that really helped shape the county was the East-West Connector. People don't realize how monumental that East-West Connector was.
That was your project, wasn't it?
I was hired to build the East-West Connector. Okay. They had been trying to get the East-West Connector, call it the Hospital Connector years ago. But since 1958, they couldn't get through the historic district. And Bill Byrne thought, with my background and being a former federal employee, I probably could guide or navigate those waters to get that East-West Connector. I wasn't so sure I could do it myself either, because when you tell the leaders of this county have been trying since 1958 and were unsuccessful, that was a tall mountain for me to climb.
It's just almost unimaginable.
Because it did so much for transportation if we didn't have it. It's so much I won't even travel it during peak hours to get around to that side. But anyway, but that was monumental.
Yeah, I really hadn't thought about that, but and we also saw the growth of school systems improve. KSU from a 2-year school,
to a 4,
Southern Poly, its growth. So we've captured that.
There are a lot of things. Yeah.
There's a lot of things going on. So, David, just tell us about you, David Hankerson, how you got here, how you became county manager, the key parts of your journey to get here.
I was all my life. My father was my mentor, and he was a row crop farmer, and I wanted to be a row crop farmer. And so my father was determined that I needed an education, and I needed to do that and get a job and plan for retirement and do some other things. Then if I still wanted to be a farmer, the farm would be there. Once I retired, I decided that's what I wanted to do. So I went off and I attained a degree. Let me turn this on.
Everybody is silent.
Yeah. So I majored in agronomy soil science. I could work as an agronomist or a soil scientist, depending on what area I wanted to train in with USDA SCS, which is now NRCS. So upon graduation, I was recruited by USDA to come to Cobb. One of the worst days of my life, because growing up in South Georgia, I had no desire to live in the Atlanta area. We had nothing but bad thoughts about Atlanta and its traffic and the politics and the whole gamut. But so my first assignment was Cobb County. So I accepted it. Going back, and as Martin Luther King would say, when you got a job, give it your best until you can find something else. So my goal was to try to find something. I wanted to work with farmers. I wanted to do row crop. I wanted to do pest control. I wanted to do that stuff, conservation and always the techniques. But I came here, and there were very few farmers in Cobb. There were still some row crops in Cobb when I got here. But I got here, and
What year was that?
June 10th, 1973. Could tell you my salary to the penny, but anyway. So I got here, and in Soil Conservation Service, no matter what community we went into, we were taught to get to know the leaders, to get to know what the issues, and they're different from county to county, community to community. And we would not be successful until we actually, and the leaders were not always politicians. The greatest leaders in most counties were not politicians, is what we found. And a lot of them were native born and strong. A lot of them were business people. And so I got here, and I spent quite a bit of time doing that. But there was still some large landowners here, so I got to know them, and they guided me. As a matter of fact, I asked a number of them if they would be a mentor for me. The large landowners, the native Cobb Countyans, and I asked for that because I wanted someone that could be brutally honest with me. So I did that, and then in 1984, so I got in 73, then 84, I was working with, I was federal, so I worked with EPA and EPD, worked with the Erosion Sedimentation Act of 1975, and trained a lot of county and city employees on how to deal with best management practices. So I've been noticed by a lot of cities and counties in management because I worked with them to comply with the state law. So apparently I was being watched and didn't know it. So Cobb County in 1970, late 70s, early 80s, were having some difficulties with EPD. They threatened to take away some of their permitting authority if they didn't come into compliance. So apparently I was identified as someone that could come in and help us maintain our permitting authority. So I was approached by Jim Miller's staff to determine if I would consider leaving the federal government, which was a dream job to me. But my vision was to get back into South Georgia, East Georgia, anywhere there was farmland. But they wanted to know if I would consider leaving the federal government. And that was a tough decision because with the federal government in those days, I had a job for life. Unless there's a reduction in force, I did something stupid, or they cut the budgets. And I didn't plan to do any of those. For a young man with a young family, I worked 9 days in 2 weeks, so every Friday I was off
Good job.
Good job. So I worked 4 9-hour days a week and 1 8-hour day on one Friday, and the next Friday I was off. So I put in my 80 hours. So then I worked in Cobb and got to know some folks. And then they expanded my territory to North Fulton. So I worked in North Fulton, identified a number of leaders in North Fulton like Herb Hawkins, J.D. Wood, those folks. And I'm forgetting the man's name, but he was one of the last dairies. It's that road that run out of Roswell to the mall. It's got a name to it. I'm drawing, but it's named after him. He became a mentor of mine as well. Herb Hawkins had a big feed and seed and hardware store. So I got to know them. And then later on, they expanded my duties to all of Fulton. So I worked North Fulton and South Fulton. Then after that, they decided to expand my duties to DeKalb. So I worked Cobb, Fulton, DeKalb. And then later after that, before I left the federal government, they expanded my territory to Douglas County. So I was in charge of the programs for SCS in those 4 counties, Cobb, Fulton, DeKalb, and Douglas. So I said yes. I told Jim Miller I would leave to head up a department that didn't exist. And I was charged with giving some goals, and one of them was to streamline the permitting process. And the board would back me on my recommendations as long as it was practical, fit into the way Cobb did business. So I came in and they created development control. I did that for a short period of time. Then they decided to do development and inspection. So I took over all inspections except permitting, building permitting. So then they decided to expand the program to give me planning and zoning. And so, and code enforcement. But just prior to that, they had given me building inspections. So we eliminated the planning and zoning director slot and the building inspections director. They were all department heads just like I was. The board backed me 100%.
Who was? Tell me what Jim Miller was doing at that time. Was he county manager? Was he?
He was county manager when I was hired. Prior to that, he was the Parks and Recreation director, and he worked with the fair board, and he was director, but he also oversaw the fair.
So that's
but his whole career was Parks and Recreation, and so he hired me, and so we did that. So we were able to then, and they wanted to streamline the permitting process. That was a challenge. Because we wanted to create the one-stop shopping, where there was one person had the ultimate decision before it went to the board to make the decisions. If you as a homeowner, landowner, developer, builder, you could come into my office and I'll work you through the maze and to make sure we streamline the process. And that one-stop process was a model for this region. Nobody else had it. And it was all created by me, but you had to know the process to be able to do it. No other jurisdiction today could do what I did because you didn't have the leader with the knowledge or the political backing to create it. But I had it. So the Earl Smith and the Jim Millers and the Butch Thompson and all the commissioners at that time, they supported that one-stop shopping. It still's a model. But we'll look.
Can I interrupt for
Yes, sir.
Just for a second? When he, this is just going to make his job a little easier. When he asked you a question about, tell me about Roy Barnes.
Yeah.
Well, that makes it difficult.
Say the name.
They say the name. He
I
says,
will.
tell me about Roy Barnes. Well, Roy Barnes was.
Yeah.
So it's just,
Okay. Oh, we can do that.
Yeah.
But so I was the department head for 9 years of community development. I was the face of planning and zoning, site development, and the whole gamut.
Everybody loved you, didn't they?
No, I don't know about that. I never did anything to be loved. I I would always say that if I do my job and do it well, you should like me. If not, I got a problem. So you just do. So we had a great process. But I'll never forget today that when I presented my plan for consolidation to the county staff, some of the staff didn't like it. They couldn't see the need for it. They didn't see the vision. And I'll never forget when Mark Danneman was planning and zoning. He knew it. Mark Danneman knew zonings. So we were in this room of about 50 people, and Mark Danneman stood up and said, Mr. Hankerson, I don't see the need for this. I don't think it's going to work, and I think it's the dumbest idea I ever heard. So I said, Mr. Danneman, just bear with me and let me explain what I'm trying to do. So he said, okay. So he go on another few minutes down. He said, I still think it's a dumb idea. And I said, Mark, just bear with me. You're an asset to this county. You provide a grade. We want you on the team. And I said, please, I want you to work with me. So we go on, and he got up again. I still think it's a dumb idea. So I said, fine. So you got up this one particular time. He said, I brought my letter of resignation, and I got it with me. And I had about had enough. I said, Mr. Danneman, put your letter of resignation on the table so I can sign it and get out of my meeting so I can continue. He shut up. He didn't say another word. He came back the next day. He said, Mr. Hankerson, I took that letter of resignation home, and I don't ever intend to bring it back, and I want to be a member of your team. And so that turned out to be a great thing, and he was a strong supporter in helping me implement this one-stop shopping in the whole gamut. So we did that. So then in 1992, Bill Byrne was chair. I was happy being development control director because you work with from homeowners to whatever, from a pool permit to whatever. So then Bill Byrne said, Mr. Hankerson said, I've got to find a county manager, and you're my choice to become county manager. I said, I don't want it. I said, I think Mac Henderson's doing a good job, and I think you should keep him. So he said, no, that's not a choice. He said, if you decide to accept it, then I'm going to put your name up to the board. If you're not, I'm going outside. I'm not going to, there's nobody else in county government I will consider is a recommendation to the board to be county manager. And you need to convince all your fellow department heads. It's either you, someone they already know, or I'm going outside. So my department heads got behind me and said, please, Mr. Hankerson, consider taking it. So I said, well, no, I got a young family. My daughter's in college. She'll be graduating soon. Well, she had just finished. And as I got twin boys and another son that got to go off to college, and kind of managers' lives are short-lived. And there's a good example here in Cobb, because there was 3 prior to me. And I respected all 3 of them. And they last 10 years combined.
Yeah, I read a ACCG report, or maybe it was a presentation. The average life of a county manager was like 3.2 years or something in that range, on average across.
On average,
yeah.
3 to 4 years. Yeah. Some people say 5, but it's 5 or less.
Yeah. Like
And in big government, yeah, just like school superintendent, big governments is normally less than that. They may make it 1 term. So I was not enthused because I thought Jim Miller did a great job. Pat Solano, a lot of folks didn't like, but as a professional, I thought he was doing a great job. And then Mac Henderson, I thought was doing a great job, so I couldn't, like Mark, I couldn't see the need to change. But if the decision was made to change it, then I would throw my hat in there. But so we did, and I was appointed county manager. But I just didn't know at the time if Cobb County was ready for an African American county manager, to be honest with you. Never had any bad experiences in Cobb, but knowing some of the history of Cobb, from the martyr vote to a lot of other things. I just didn't know if the county was ready. And so I asked Bill Byrne that question. Did he think Cobb County was ready for an African American county manager? Bill looked at me with his stone face and he said, nope. And looked like it was minutes, but it probably just a few seconds. He said, but they're ready for you. He said, if you can do the job, you stay here 20 plus years. If you can't do the job, you're out of here just like the rest of them. Now, what's your issue? So, and I said, well, I know I can, said to myself, I know I can do the job. So I'll be there 20 plus years in my own mind. But I was going to do the job, not expecting to last over 2 or 3 or 4 years, to be honest with you. But I was going to do the job as if I wanted it for 20 years and be prepared to walk out of the door with no hard feelings after 3 or 4 years, because that was the average tenure of a county manager. So 24 and a half years later, I was the county manager, so never any controversy or anything like that. I enjoyed serving the citizens of this county. So
we've when we interviewed Roy Barnes, and there's some other examples, Cobb County has something that was labeled the Cobb Way. We did things in a way that other counties couldn't do. Things were resolved in meetings man to man. You didn't have to do it through the media. You don't have big, huge fights. The way we did business in Cobb was different and unique. And that comes from people like yourself, David, where people are willing to sit down and talk and be willing to compromise and get things done. And to the average person, they don't ever see that in the newspaper or hear about it. Since you were a big part of that, why don't you talk a little bit about that? How did we get there, David? What was the history? What was your role in keeping this moving like it was? I mean, people respect Cobb County. They don't know why Cobb is the way it is. But it wasn't just by chance. There were some specific sort of things that were done by leadership in this county.
As I talked earlier about my former training with Soil Conservation Service, they said every community is different. In other words, what they were saying without saying, you've got to do it the community way. It didn't get there overnight, and you're not going to come in here and make those changes. So I had to come in and learn the Cobb way. If I went to another community, I'd have had to learn it their way. So early on in my career, I figured out you had to do it the Cobb way. It could have been Fulton, it could have been anywhere else. But what I admired about this county, the leadership from the first chairman that I knew, Herbert McCullum was still living. Ernest Barrett, the first chair of the 5 County Board of Commissioners, that I had to look and see how they were doing it and assist the way they wanted to get it done. But if not, you are not going to be successful. So yes, we label a lot of things, and people in there years said a Cobb way, which is very true. It's nothing I could have done to be part of the leadership of this county if I didn't do it the Cobb way.
Would you describe what you mean by the Cobb way? I mean, I already know, but on camera, how would you describe the Cobb way of doing things?
Well, the Cobb way, it was not, Cobb did not want to reinvent the wheel. Cobb meant you got to share the vision, or you got to share your vision with others so it become accepted by the community. And once you do that, it becomes part of the Cobb way in the Cobb community. You are not going to get it done. And you got to understand that, and that was my perspective. The leadership from the Ernest Barretts and the others, even when they created the county manager, it had to fit into the Cobb way as to the long-term vision. And Cobb has always had a long-term vision. But most governments in their long-term planning is going to be 5, 6 years, 7 years. You don't do long-term planning out 15 to 20 years because things change so much, and you got to be willing to accept change. But you got to have that vision to help mold it 15 to 20 years out. But when you start putting out long-term and short-term goals, like Governor Barnes said, you got to know the history, you know how to get there. You never around Governor Barnes or others to talk about, he's always going to bring up the way he grew up in Mableton on a dairy farm and having the cattle cross the road and all. So he never forgot that. And the Cobb way with the Ernest Barretts, and as long as people understand that you understand, it's easy to sell yours. But if you come in here with a bright idea, it's like my daddy told me one time when I was growing up, after I got my degree in soil science, I wanted to go back to the farm and bring some new techniques of farming to my dad. And my dad listened to me patiently, and finally he said, son said, I think that's a great idea. And I think it's worth the consideration. He said, but I know my way. I know how to farm my way. And he said, when we're using your money, we'll try your way, but until that, we're going to do it my way. And so I got that picture pretty quick. And so, you know, I've always, in Cobb, in leadership, when you're dealing with taxpayers' money, they got to share that vision, and they've got to be part of the Cobb way. You got to battle. Because this county has been conservative since I've been here, and you will get criticized beyond belief if you don't share those visions to make it a Cobb way as opposed to the Hankerson way or the Roy Barnes way or Johnny Isaacson way. You got to share that vision, and Cobb is always, and I think other communities are the same way. We just, it wasn't me that labeled that the Cobb way, but I understood it pretty quickly.
We have had somebody that most communities don't have that played a role in ethical government. His name was Otis Brumby. And if you, David Hankerson, the county manager, were misappropriating monies, Otis would know it. And you've got counties around us where commissioners have gone to jail, and mayor of Atlanta went to jail, but we've always maintained a set of ethical standards. You had a good relationship with Otis. How did you build a good relationship with a guy that kept us clean, if you will?
It's pretty simple to me. Be honest. Tell the truth. Because Mr. Brumby, as I knew him, would ask you direct questions. And Hankerson was known as county manager. He didn't ask a question that he didn't already know the answer. So I would assume that if Ernest Brumby asked me a question, he knew the answer, or he knew more than I thought he knew. And you're gonna fall in. So I was always honest with Mr. Brumby. And I was always conservative and managed the money as if it was mine. And knowing I was a temporary custodian there to manage Cobb County government. And so with that, and many times when there were stories going on about me, and the AJC put a report in here, a lot of times if there were some questions on Otis' mind, he didn't send a reporter alone. Otis would come with one or two reporters, and I knew there were going to be some direct questions, and I knew that Otis knew the answers. And it was always my goal in life, is to be honest as I knew it and tell the truth. And Mr. Brumby and I never got crossways, but he would ask some pointed, direct questions. And so with that, I think that was the big key.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
Related to that, actually, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The average tenure of a county manager, as you said, was 4. What did you do that allowed you to serve until it was your turn to go out? And at the same time, you had to make hard decisions. It's not like you just were a yes person to everybody, but what did you do? How do you attribute your success?
Well, I think that I listened to all my commissioners. I listened to other leaders. I listened to, I had advisors in the community. I had advisors in the business community. I was real involved in so many nonprofits, the chamber. So I was always a listener. And I viewed my role as county manager was to, when I get those visions from the commissioners, to try to assist them in accomplishing what they want to accomplish within my authority. To assist the board when they set goals, to try to assist them in accomplishing those goals, especially once they took a vote. It was not David Hankerson because he didn't like this or he didn't like that. That's just like one time I remember this story with Commissioner Powell. She wanted a tree ordinance back in the 80s. And I, as an old country boy, never saw a tree I liked because we saw a tree as timber. And so it was sooner or later going to market unless it was a shade tree. And so I said, Commissioner Powell, I'm not your person. And I said, I've never seen a tree I liked. So she said, I understand that, Mr. Hankerson, but I think with your background that you know what it takes to write a tree ordinance. And if you provide the leadership in writing that tree ordinance, you can work with those frameworks of what you like or dislike, not taken away from people that was managing timber for harvest and the whole gamut. So I didn't have it, it was put to me that way. So it was my goal in life to write a good tree ordinance for Cobb County and to write one that I could support and recognizing state laws and everything else. So I wrote the tree ordinance in the mid-'80s. That tree ordinance today is substantially in the same form as I wrote it. And I would only have staff, a professional staff, that would assist in enforcement and carrying out this ordinance as the Board of Commissioners wanted to go in the citizens of this county. So that was a big, and that's a good example that I managed Cobb County government that way. There was never a commissioner that I didn't assist in them trying to do what they want to do based on the vision they were getting from their constituents and taxpayers.
A lot of people call that servant leadership. I was asked when I was at Georgia Power Company to work with Burl Ellis to help him put together a strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I suggested, because I was in Cobb, why don't we get the cities involved too? And I remember his staff said, well, this city can come, but that one can't. And we're not going to do this if the chamber president comes. I'm going, how in the world are you going to develop a strategic plan if you're excluding people? Why and how did the 6 cities in Cobb County government and the chamber, how did it get to the point they all worked together? They had their feuds, I mean, you know. But
Always did and always will.
yeah.
Our goals may have been different. But we work with I as professional staff. We work with the city's professional staff, from police to community development to water and sewer. We work to build a relationship with the cities. And to my knowledge, there was never any conflict between professional staff from one jurisdiction to another. As a matter of fact, we started meeting under my leadership once a month with every city manager in the county, just managers and sometimes support staff, so that we stayed professional on the same page, knowing that city councilmen, aldermen, board of commissioners get crossways on House Bill 489. But the way we work together, the cities were always inclusive in Cobb. There was never divide for Marietta, Ackworth, Kennesaw. We had any problem. So everything was intended to be inclusive. As reading House Bill 489, we've been able to move forward with it. dealing with duplication of services. Everything was always civil. And with staff working together, we pretty well knew what some of the hot buttons were from one jurisdiction to another. And we try to work out some of those things long before we got into a meeting with the politicians. And that was very, very key to it.
I assume that working at ACCG in particular, you got to see a lot of what other counties were doing. And of course, you were a key part of ACCG training.
Yeah, I was training for 20 years.
Yeah. What we had in Cobb is what you just described. I went up to Gordon County and helped them put a strategic plan together.
Calhoun. Mm-hmm.
Calhoun. I liked the city mayor.
Right.
And I liked the county chairman, Becky Hood. But in the course of this, I found out they never sit down and talk to each other. They had coffee together once or twice in the last couple of years. And I'm just thinking, how in the world can you operate that way? And 489 was a disaster out there.
Right,
I mean,
right.
It was a disaster.
Well, see, Cobb, you never heard much about it.
No, you never did.
And see, that's the thing. That's the reason I always thought. And they still meet. We tried to work a lot with, I work with training every new commissioner every 2 years. Every 2 years you get new commissioners. So I was a trainer, only consistent kind of manager that worked with training new commissioners because of the success in Cobb is a lot of the outsiders would see Cobb. And so by training new commissioners, I could get to understand. So then being part of the International City County Managers Association, being the Georgia City County Managers Association, I was president of Georgia County Managers Association. I was president of the Georgia City County Managers Association for 2 years. And they looked at me as the godfather of county city managers, mainly due to age. But that's what I always tell them. But anyway, but from the experience and being in this government as long as I have, all the issues that they had in these cities, I could help them work through them and to provide some leadership without getting grossly involved in politics. I've stayed out of politics. I know politics. I understood it, but you never saw me endorse anybody. You never saw me doing anything, taking sides. That was up to the Board of Commissioners. And David Hankerson, if I voiced my opinion as one-on-one, never out publicly or go against commissioners. And so I just thought a lot of communication is the key to so much at home, at the county, cities, among city counties. I remember when the Georgia Municipal Association executive director and the Georgia ACCG director, they weren't hardly speaking. Those are tough times. But I remember when they were united and worked together and a lot more was accomplished. And some of this was going on in the early stages of House Bill 489. It made it tough for a lot of cities and counties to come together because of some of the bickering and some of the other things that was going on. But
I worked with Lamar for many years at the Fire Company.
Yeah.
I could easily see him being less than cooperative on issues.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah.
They were cordial, he and Ross.
Good.
But a lot of that was before he got there with Jerry Griffin and some of the rest of them.
Yeah.
But it was tough building a good relationship, and they were working on it. It's not back where it needs to be, but the new GMA director coming out of Valdosta, I think he'll work to try to do some of that, to do that.
I want to get you to repeat some of what I'm saying in your own words, but one thing that I was always amazed at, we're growing so fast, roads are important. And once a year, you guys would host a meeting up here and bring the DOT staff, a lot of them. And then you bring the mayors together, the chamber there, and y'all would recognize people that had helped the county. So when you got a need, you knew each other.
Right.
And you had respect for each other. And up in Gordon County, I was surprised they'd never sat down and talked to any of the folks from DOT. It blows my mind. You talk about relationships, but that's a great example of the payback you get for building relationships. So it's a statewide organization, and not only with the cities and the counties relationship count, it's other agencies of state government that I think we do and people take it for granted.
It is, and we would do that periodically, meet with the chamber, meet with Georgia Dot, meet with the CID, because at a long time we only had to come on CID. But our visions were shared. CID couldn't do anything alone. Cobb County needed them as a partner and to help promote a lot of things. And so when we would do SPLOS, and Cobb County was the first county in the state that had a SPLOS, I believe it was 1985, 86, somewhere thereabouts. When we would have these countywide projects, before we started breaking it up by percentage, by jurisdictions, we had to have buy-in from the cities, because they had to know just because it wasn't in my jurisdiction, it still benefit the county, and we had to work on that. I remember when we did the Cumberland Boulevard. That was one of the biggest projects that Georgia Dot had done, and certainly the CID here in Cobb. As I remember, it was like a $73 million project. But you had to do that by communicating. We did the East-West Connector. The amount of money we spent on that, a lot of it was countywide. And we had to have buy-in from the cities rather than fighting. So, well, it ain't benefiting me and Marietta, it's going around Cobb. But we communicated and make them a part of that decision. And that's the reason we met with county managers, we met with mayors, we would meet with jurisdictions. But I think that's the key, is memberships, different organizations, and Cobb would always be a part of that. And when you're dealing with Georgia Dot or the federal Georgia Dot, we learned quickly that if you together as a community, it made their decision much easier. And that was the Cobb way. Whether you thought going to Washington was a waste of time and going down there, the Cobb way, we didn't think so. We thought communication was a big key. And so we went to Georgia Dot. And our DOT rate from Jim Croy to Fay DeMassimo and others, it was all about communications. It's all about sharing. And communications has been the key to all of it. And so my success too, as you brought up earlier, was communication.
It's one of the, in management literature, they'll talk about things managers can do to get better results, set goals better.
Right.
But the cheapest productivity tool you've got is communication.
Communication.
Yeah.
If you can't communicate, you can't do anything else.
My wife tells me I'm not a good communicator. Of course, I don't buy that. An example.
I started to say something, but we on camera.
Yeah, so was I.
An example of that is the Northwest Corridor or East. It's Managed Lane, whatever.
Yeah.
They were bend over backwards to work with us because that relationship was there. So, you want to talk about any stories or meetings or whatever that resulted in this beautiful thing we got running up through our county?
Well, we had a...
Bring us into the room, into the moment.
East-West Connector, as an example, the East-West Connector, and then start.
Yeah, as we built the East-West Connector, and the community did, and the leadership. The CID, the chamber provided a lot of communications. And as we as a community worked together with Georgia Dot and that public-private partnership, like we did the Cumberland Boulevard, we did the East-West Connector, we did the widenings of the interstate. There was buy-in. The Managed Lane project, because at one time where the Managed Lane project was a corridor that was, if the voters had approved it, would have been mass transit, was going to travel along there with stations, but the perfect fit for that. So that Managed Lane and communication, Georgia Dot did everything to communicate with our staff, the leadership. The chamber would have them up to speak to different groups with Leadership Cobb. That's the Cobb way. We did nothing in isolation. Everything was to educate as many people about what you're doing, that they could in some ways talk about it, as opposed to wondering what it is and what are you doing, how you spending my tax dollars. Because most people never knew that that was a managed lane public-private partnership. And that's so much. And that's the reason I think they started in Cobb, because they knew no matter what they did in Cobb, I know they did Henry, but it was an easier construction project, like going up 575. But I think bringing the community along and letting them know what you're doing, and the district engineer and the Georgia Dot Director and our staff was fully briefed all the way through statuses, on time, whatever, was the big key. And that again has been the Cobb way, is communicate, get the community involved, so that if they want to criticize or compliment, they had the facts to do so.
Well, there's this example after example of the payback of relationships. Ben Mathis was chair. Ben Mathis, myself, and Malika went down to talk to Russell about this ramp that wasn't in the original project. And Russell told his staff, we'll figure out how to do it, when they didn't want to do it. But that was because of this long history of relationships.
It is, because there's many thought that the federal government would never approve that ramp. And I know Malika was very persistent. The chamber was supportive. Faye DeMassimo and all of our leadership was supportive. Commissioners were supportive. But deep down in many of our hearts, we knew that was a long shot. But because we worked together, there was no divisiveness. If there had been divisiveness on the home front, that ramp would not be coming to reality.
That's exactly.
And because there were people that had vision. That's been the Cobb way, is to, you talked about water and sewer. Ernest Barrett took a lot of criticism over running water and sewer all over this county. Only 20, 30, 40 years later, it was hailed as one of the greatest leadership positions, and made Ernest one of the greatest leaders that's probably perceived to ever come through this county.
Talk about Ernest a little bit as you knew him or knew about him.
Okay. Commissioner Barrett was chairman when I arrived in Cobb in 1973. He was, I think his first year was 1964, when they started the 5-member Board of Commissioners. Fine gentleman. When he was elected chair of Cobb, most people don't know, he was the only chair of ARC for 18 years. And he provided great leadership. But Commissioner Barrett was a listener. Commissioner Barrett listened to the citizens of this county, whether you were just you own nothing but a home, to large business people. Most of the large business people had Ernest's ear, just no more than David Hankerson if he walked in. And I think he kept his ear to the ground, and he made decisions, and he had some good advisors. And I think that well respected. He carried himself very ethically. It's so much so many people think he went out of office poorer than when he went in, because he was trying to do things for the good of the county and not trying to build his business, because you knew he had a chain of dry cleaners. But very good man. Very good man.
Mike Plant, the president of the Braves, is, I've heard him say this about 12 times, I think, 12 or 13. I was trying to count them up once. That no other place in America could a baseball stadium go from
concept to reality.
3 years, if it wasn't for Cobb County government.
You know, I wouldn't know, but when Mike Plant made that statement, and when I was just thinking in the state of Georgia, especially in the metropolitan area, it is no way that no other jurisdiction other than Cobb that could have happened. A lot of it was because of, even once this decision was made, the tough part was trying to get all the permitting. And when you're building a stadium, even trying to get the contract, that's a specialty law. None of my staff or our staff had any experience in sports law. But to get to the permitting process, it was that streamlined permitting process that the decisions could be made, even code changes at times. And since I was the county manager / CEO, I could make calls administratively. I couldn't change the codes. But there are a lot of things that in building a stadium that, or any other building, that are administrative decisions. And I had administrative authority over all county staff, unless there was a code that I couldn't override. So we worked together on that. We met frequently. My staff met with the Braves, and I would venture to say and be willing to put a wager on it, I don't think it could have been done anywhere else in the United States.
Well, they said that, maybe not in the world, to go.
And they would know. They would know from talking to other stadiums that were being built and listening to them talk to other stadium owners or other cities. No one can believe that that stadium went from concept to reality in a short period of time.
I've heard Mike also say that typically it goes from 6 or 7 to 10 years
Yeah.
from concept to construction, and sometimes never, depending on the involvement by the public. So that has to be, David, one of your, and I'll just ask you a question, one of your best accomplishments. What do you consider the top 3 or 4 accomplishments during your long tenure as county manager?
Well, and if there's such a legacy for David Hankerson and what his top accomplishments were as a department head to county manager to, the end of my career here, one of was to build the East-West Connector, and the other one would be the Braves Stadium from one end of that. In the interim would have been the Cobb County Safety Village, and what we were able to do that most people couldn't do. It took us a while to get it there for the community to have buy-in. But it's those kind of things that and I can look back at all the other things that we have done in this county. It's so many great things, it's just so many you can't list them. But those will be some things that I remember for a long time. When you start out with building East-West Connector to materializing the SunTrust Park and the Battery, even in my wildest imagination, I couldn't imagine what has been going on and how fast the Battery and the economic boom and what it's done for the taxes in this county. And seeing the CIDs in the chamber, especially CIDs. Cumberland Mall, I always tell people in the Cumberland Mall, if you know how to get around Cumberland Mall, you're never in the major traffic jams. You just have to get off the interstate.
I think, David, one thing that, and you may feel entirely different, but I think one of your accomplishments has been to ensure this county didn't have broad race relation issues. The MLK event is one example, but there's a lot of things you've had to do behind the scenes to calm things down when something happens. And it's not just because you're an African American.
Right.
This is something that's a passion of yours. Would you talk about that?
I agree, and I'm very proud of that. When I was hired with Cobb County, I was the only professional African American department head or key manager or staff person. Only one. If my memory serves me right. Knowing the history of Cobb, is I saw it, being a white flight county. Nothing negative about it, but that was just the image of people out of other parts of the state. And then you look around the county and our staff numbers. Most of our staff were in entry-level positions. So I was determined that we needed to look a lot like the community. But we couldn't get there overnight. We didn't get where we were. overnight, and we were not going to make changes overnight. And I think when I became county manager, even the relationship we had with other elected officials, I worked hard to have a good working relationship professionally with every elected official in county government and outside of county government. So then I was determined that I needed to make changes. So much so that when I was appointed county manager, many people, elected, appointed officials inside the perimeter, didn't even know I was an African American. It was probably 5, 6, 7 years before most people realized I was African American. I wasn't embarrassed by it, but I wanted to show people that I could do it honorably and everything else. And let's look at the accomplishment as opposed to the color of your skin. But I felt too that getting diversity in our county government, diversity in our community, to make sure people are welcome. And when I came to Cobb, I believe the research I did, Cobb African American population was about 6%, and that included the cities. And when you look at that, and I had an unincorporated Cobb, if you did not know where African Americans, other minorities lived that owned land in other areas, they were African American subdivisions, and there were pockets. And our vision was to do anything I could to eliminate it. You don't see any African Americans. Those non-minority subdivisions, people feel free to live wherever. And so we started working not only in county government, to making sure, because I knew also if I was a failure as a county manager, it would be a long time before you had the opportunity to give another African county manager. Well, we had one, and he didn't survive. So we worked there. So I worked to try to get our numbers up. We met with EEOC. We met with NAACP. We reviewed our numbers. I was honest with NAACP, what I could do, what I couldn't do, and the change wasn't going to come overnight. We met every year. There were some tense meetings about the lack of diversity in Cobb County government that I had some control over, but not all of it. And so when we started doing that, and when you look at our numbers today, when you look at the numbers in this county, you look at our numbers in Cobb County government, where you look at elected officials and look at the ones that are in appointed or elected positions. You know, we talked earlier about Judge Holmes. 30, 40 years ago, that never would have happened. And so, without me having any input, a lot of elected officials started hiring African Americans. So when you go in this county today, in every elected office, you see African Americans everywhere. And I did not surround myself with African Americans. I did not have one African American on my immediate administrative staff other than a receptionist. And I wanted to make sure we got them in the DOTs, in the police department, in the fire departments, and others. And that was my goal, not surround myself. So the diversity in this county was such a key. And I think being a part of that and sponsoring the Martin Luther King Day celebration, because when we started out the Martin Luther King Day celebration, the majority of the crowd were minorities. You go there today, it is a very, very, very diverse. But we also had, by building those relationships and meeting with the NAACP, Deanne Bonner, we communicated, and they knew what we were doing and not doing. So we built that relationship that if someone started attacking Cobb about what we're doing or not doing, Deanne Bonner, if she opted to defend, she had all the numbers, all the facts and figures, know where to get what she needed to, and things like that. Like we talked about all these other projects. The same thing with the community. We put ourselves out there. We put the truth out there. They knew what to expect and when. And it was all inclusive.
Yeah, add a couple words about this, because I think it's real impressive. When the MLK event happens, all the mayors are typically there.
Yeah.
Probably 3/4 of the judges.
Yeah.
The whole community.
Yeah.
It's a microcosm of the whole community.
It is.
Let's just talk about that a little. Let's get it on tape.
That's what we wanted to do. A lot of folks, the Board of Commissioners supported me, but the idea of a county co-sponsoring a Martin Luther King Day celebration with the NAACP surprised the heck out of a lot of folks. They didn't know what to expect. But we did it. And it was a true partnership. And we were able to do things and be inclusive, and we could underwrite a lot of costs with like use of buildings, use of TV 23. We can record it, get it out to the community, replay it. We kept our Board of Commissioners. One of the best partnerships that we ever have had in this county is that partnership with NAACP. And we made everyone feel welcome. And we were not there to bash anyone over history or whether you were this minority or that. We were very careful with our speakers, and we built that relationship of trust. And I was there. I was part of the programming. Judy, my secretary, actually wrote the script in the program. And so if you got off script, we knew it. Deanne and I and Doreen and a few others had a committee. We knew what was expected. And so we had to, we were at the Civic Center, and the Civic Center was probably less than half when we started. We outgrew the Civic Center. We had to have overflow crowds over into the Hudgens Hall with TVs out there. So we just got to the point where we wanted to move it, where we were worried about what I could do with public funds if we moved to a church or anything to do with separation of church and state. We were able to move to a much larger facility. We didn't have to worry about the overflow crowds and others. If they continue the way they're going, they will outgrow the current location, Turner Chapel, because everyone feel welcome to be a part of it. And that's another major accomplishment, I think, that we were able to do with a good, successful partnership.
I don't know if you want to address this or not, but I was on a trip when all this stuff with Charlotte happened.
Mm-hmm.
You remember?
Yeah.
There was a big divide.
It was.
Did y'all, as a county, you specifically, ever look at what caused those problems and reflect them back on what we're doing? And I was telling people on this trip, David, this wouldn't happen in Cobb County.
I never use the word never, because a lot of times you got copycats, you got people doing things, but I could tell you the relationship we built with SCLC, NAACP, other African American leaders on boards and a number of other things. I think the chances of that happening in Cobb were very, very slim, because when I arrived here in 1973, to the day, I've never experienced any outward racism or resentment towards me. And if anyone recognizes it, my daddy told me another story. He said, when I came to Cobb with the history of Cobb, I would go home sometime and I said, Dad, I said, you know, I've been going to these big farm houses, these mansions, and I've yet to be sent to the back door. Because in Burke County, it was very common to be sent to the back door back in the 60s and 70s. So he said, yeah, I understand. And I said, I know one day it's going to happen, he said, son, can I offer you a piece of advice? he said, stop looking for something that may not exist or may not ever occur. He says, if you're experiencing of it, deal with it at that time. Stop looking for it, because if you look for it, you're going to find something somewhere or read something. He said, if you see an African American and a white man fighting, that don't mean there's no racism. They just don't like each other. And so that was that advice stuck with me, and I stopped looking in that day, and that was in the 80s. And to this day, from that day to this one, I've never ever experienced anything to me that was obvious resentment or racism.
David, we've talked a lot about this journey Cobb County went through. And when you take a journey, sometimes you get to a fork in the road.
Yeah.
You can go left or you can go right.
Right.
The outcomes would be different. What have been the forks in the road under your administration where you had to make a hard decision? See, the public wouldn't know about a lot of those. What do you think are some big ones that we did right and we're here today because of it?
Well, I think going back to Ernest Barrett, there was a fork in the road, sewer, no sewer. You could have gone down that route to let the demand or the development drive the process. But the county took a different fork, and it was a right fork, but a lot of people didn't realize it for 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road. With the water authority, the counties could have taken a different approach dealing with the CIDs and all those things. Those were big forks. The county took them. The county had some decisions to make with land use in this county. There was some wanted to use, they wanted to slow down growth. That was a big thing with Bill Byrne. And he wanted to use land use as a method for slowing down growth, not resenting or turning away anyone, just watch the densities and other things. And you know, there were a time when they had moratoriums on apartments to regroup and look at land use. And we took the fork to do a moratorium for a number of years. Later years, time changed. Now we welcome apartments again, certainly with the younger generations. And you see some of those, and they've been overwhelming success. High-end quality developments and condos. I think the county made some decision when I look at DeKalb County, not in a negative way, but I don't know what I would have done in DeKalb without a SPLOST. DeKalb did not have a SPLOST until recently. So their roads and everything else, I don't know how they managed it until the infrastructure, and they had a cap on the 1%. Until Michael Thurman went in, they won that SPLOST, but it was in the works. But you know, those type challenges was unbelievable. But we took the fork to go that way. Those kinds, the airport, you know, people in this county, I think to make our airport an international airport with the custom tower, a facility, building of the tower, our airport is an economic engine. It's part of our promotion of economic development. We could have made a decision because people were complaining about the noise. That was a fork that I think long term is going to be one of the greatest assets. It is an asset. It's a good asset. But I think even more so, and it'd be even more so if we wasn't landlocked. But I think this county going to a county managed form of government.
What year was that?
What
year was
1983. Many counties, we only have a few strong county managed form of governments in the state. People use those terms interchangeably. They'll say county manager, county administrator. Cobb is one. Cobb and Fulton were one of the few that have a strong county managed form of government. There's no other big county have a strong county managed form of government. They call them county managers, But the vision that Johnny Isaacson had for a strong county manager form of government was the county manager. If you look at the county manager bill under the Board of Commissioners, the county manager is the county manager / CEO. He or she is responsible for day-to-day operation. There are things that's in that legislation only the legislature can change. They could not abolish. Gwinnett was a strong county manager form of government. Gwinnett went back to an administrative form of government where the chairman is in charge, and the CAI went with his CEO. I was a county manager for Charlotte Nash because they were trying to revert back from a county manager to an administrative form of government. So Charlotte Nash was not a county manager. She was an administrator. They still have an administrator. They call them county manager. You can actually give an administrator more authority to do the county manager. But the Board of Commissioners can go into one public meeting and give or take away any authority that that county manager have. And I think Cobb making the decision in the mid-'80s to go county manager form of government with professional staff, with all the department heads reporting to Cobb, to the manager, was a big fork in the road. And I think all of that was part of that vision that makes Cobb and set Cobb a little bit apart from others. Because department heads in Cobb does not have to fear their job when a commissioner say, I'll fire you. A commissioner can't fire nobody in Cobb. And I think if it had been any other way, even the county manager would take a majority of the board. Those kind of decisions set Cobb on the right path.
Before I change
do that.
Before I change gears, talk about people for a minute. It's been said many times we reached a fork in the road when a decision was made to bring you in versus some other opportunities, some other. It was a major fork in the road. That's the decision process. Every job I filled to some degree was a fork in the road.
Right.
But obviously the county did the right thing.
And reflecting back.
Well, sure, they almost always.
Direct and vote, you don't know you made the right decision.
No, that's the history.
It is.
Who are your heroes in the history of Cobb? Who are the people you think, besides yourself, stood out as making progress for this community?
The list is long. I can name a few, and I hate to name any, but I will name a few. Because, as I said, I look for mentors, and I would ask people if they'd be a mentor. From a private citizen, landowner, to large business people. Ernest Barrett was a mentor of mine. Earl Smith was chair when I was hired. He was a mentor of mine. He supported Jim Miller in bringing me from the federal government as a department head, and with no vision for me ever becoming county manager, not something I was really interested in anyway at the time. I looked at Johnny Isaacson, was always a mentor of mine. We talked about Leonard Wrench. We talked about they had local landowners like the Kemp families. There was a number of them. The Paul Lovingoods, the Walter Cantrells. They were large landowners, and they never had any interest in running for politics or political office. But they had the ear to the ground, and they made a lot of decisions to be able to do that. But we had Ernest Wester, who was the extension director, good leader in the community, worked with Kiwanis. There are just so many out there. The judges in this county, at the time, they were very small. Just good people. I don't know. I just had so many mentors that John Williams was a mentor of mine up until his death. I would have lunch with him periodically. A lot of people don't know I had lunch with John Williams periodically. Is it the blue, whatever grill? Yeah, Jim Croy and I would meet with him periodically. And Johnny Gresham, we meet once a month or so and have breakfast. Nothing on the agenda. They keep the ear to the ground. They advise me if they tell me I'm doing something stupid. You can just go on and on. Roy Barnes always was a mentor of mine. Connie Ingram, Fred Bentley Sr., they all were mentors of mine, and you never knew that we were communicating. So you had to have people like that. People so often, I heard this story, and he was a football player in Oklahoma, and someone asked him what kept him grounded. And I look for people that can be honest to keep me grounded. Kessel Stelling was a mentor of mine, still is. But anyway, they asked him, says, who kept you grounded? And he said, my grandmother. I was raised by my grandmother. And said, I would go home and say he was a rock star at Oklahoma, star quarterback, African American. So she said, son, says, you're a rock star at Oklahoma. He said, yes, ma'am. He said, I'm so proud of you and everything you accomplished. But I want you to keep one thing in mind. You're some of that, but you ain't all that. And I always remind myself, when people start bragging or talk about what you're doing, I'm some of that, but I ain't all that. And I love people that can keep you grounded. My wife is one that would keep me grounded. My dad and mother did. But my wife, when I walked through that door, she would always say, you're not county manager here. So, but everyone needs someone, whether you're an elected official, appointed position, chairing a nonprofit, whatever you are. I've seen commissioners over the years that I would identify personally as getting the big head. They thought they were very, very, very powerful. And I would say to people, if you feel that I'm getting a big head, you need to make a pen and deflate it, because I'm some of that, but I'm all that. And I manage the county in a humble way, because I just wasn't all what people thought I was. I may have been some of that, and I appreciate it, but I wasn't all that. And I always believed in the team concept.
I tell people I have over the years, I get my picture on the front page or around town. My wife would say the same thing. You know, you may be something out in the community, but when you come in this house, you work for me. And you ain't so good. You're not really that good, David. Just calm down.
Well, even you, David, and a lot of chamber meetings, and you would get up and introduce me to other commissioners, and you would talk about who run the county. You did a lot to try to inflate my ego, but I remain humble. And I believe some of that crap, but I didn't believe it all.
Oh, should have.
And, don't edit that.
That's his job.
So, Ty, you got any, Richard, you got any questions you want to
I want to know what Rich had to think.
I just
We
one
got
thing.
about 10 minutes left.
Okay, I don't, you can veto this.
Yeah, I understand.
But twice during the course of the conversation, I think once when we were talking about traffic, and another time we were talking about when you came in here, and somebody posted the question, is Cobb County ready for an African American?
Sure.
Question, you brought up MARTA. Is that something that we should talk about, David?
That's the interesting, that will come up. I haven't thought about this since we started, but do you know the story about why MARTA did not come up here?
I know a lot of things, but I always looked at it as politics.
Okay.
And until the decision is made to look at things like bus rapid transit or light rail or something, that my role as county manager is to stay as far away from it as I could get. once the decision was made, like for instance with the Braves, I was never part of the decision making to bring the Braves to Cobb. Once the decision was made, then it became my role as a county manager to make sure everything went through from permitting to whatever. I was the county rep for the Braves. I paid all the bills when we were using the county portion of money, from 20 to 24 million a month that we were paying out to pay the contractors through the contract. And so when I look at that as barter, I have my personal feelings, but my personal feelings is that if I was making a decision today and as a citizen and as a leader, one of the worst decisions and regrets this county will ever have is not making a decision decades ago to go with some form of rapid transit. I think that's going to be our challenge as we continue to grow. We don't have much vacant land, but for some reason Cobb is a destination, and Cobb is a pass-through in major employment centers. A lot of people pass through Cobb. It's growing leaps and bounds to get to the major employment centers, and it is just not Cobb traffic we got to manage. We got to manage traffic from Chattanooga to Calhoun to Pickens County to Alabama to South Georgia, wherever people coming through going into the employment centers. And if I had to say I had one wish or one vision, I wish Cobb had gotten into, and we'll get there, but we missed on a lot of opportunities when there were opportunities to do some form of rapid transit with dedicated right of way and some other things. That's going to continue to be a challenge. We've done great with the interstates. We've done great with the managed lanes. We've done great with our road projects in the county with the SPLOST we've had since the late 80s. But I still think at some point in time, we never look back. As Tim Lee would say, stop looking in the rearview mirror. But I just say sometime to move forward, you got to look at the past and not that you let that, because you can't do anything about it. It's simple and simple. And I think rapid transit in some form or fashion is going to be our greatest challenge to manage traffic in the next decade or so.
Just one more quick follow-up. Was the first decision, that was, we voted it down that first time, right?
I wasn't here, but yes.
Was there a racial or a racist element? And
I can only go by what I was told and what I think personally.
I answered to him.
I think that there were some racial decisions involved in it.
I think one of
the negative that people years ago, you don't hear some of the same negative things. As rapid transit was a way for the criminals they perceived to get around or come to your community. Today, criminals don't use transit.
Right. Yeah.
They use cars and everything else. But
the MARTA people will always say that, to their knowledge, they've never seen somebody with a color TV riding in a MARTA bus.
You wouldn't.
No, I'll tell you.
Now, years ago you would have,
Yeah.
but today you don't see that element there.
No, I'll tell you the biggest mistake the citizens of Georgia made, as it pertains to that. That's not re-electing Roy Barnes. We would have that outside connector. If you talk to him, it was a bigger vision than just what the public knew. We would be taking traffic off I-20 out past, way past Six Flags, and then come all the way across the top and connect over to 85 maybe.
Yeah.
Think that,
Yeah.
and all the trucks would be required to go that way. It would take tons of traffic off that interstate. David, thank you very much.
Alrighty.
We